So again, for those of you who have not been in the Kuzari class before, just very, very briefly, this book is one of the earlier books of Jewish philosophy. It is a supposed conversation. I say supposed because not Rabbi Yehuda Levi wrote the book, but it's not really a recording of what was said between this king who was looking to find the true religion and the rabbi, because the author lived about 200 years after this began. But what it is this discussion, and it's back and forth about why we believe what we believe, how we believe it, the arguments between the rabbi and the king of Khazaria, which is why the book is called the Kuzari. And after all this back and forth, and the fifth essay being quite lofty and some difficult stuff, we kind of jump towards the last part of the book, is the last few paragraphs, and in which he starts to discuss a topic that ties into last week. Last week, I gave the special shiur specifically on Mitzvat Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And the reason I did that was this next paragraph that we're about to read. I'm going to read the paragraph. We're also going to I'm going to put on the screen some slides from Rav Shlomo Aviner's book about the Kuzari. So between what we're going to hear from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and what we're going to hear from Rav Aviner this evening, I hope to knock your socks off, so to speak, and give you some, not just food for thought, but also divrei idud, or words of encouragement of where we're all holding in life right now. So if one of you, I don't have the same printing as others. If one of you wants to tell me what page paragraph 22 is on, I'll just make sure everyone knows. And if not, I'm just going to read it anyways. Anybody? Paragraph 22 in essay 5. Going once. Moshe, I'm counting on you. No pressure.
Page 588.
Page 588. There we go. Thank you, Abraham. Hey, Abraham. Right. Okay, 588. So I'm going to read the paragraph. The paragraph I will not have on the screen. But after I've gotten through reading the paragraph, I will then put on the screen the words of Rav Aviner. Oh, thanks, Cynthia. Okay. So after this whole back and forth discussion, and this discussion is taking place, let's just say somewhere in far north in Europe or somewhere in China, wherever it is right now, one of the points that was made earlier in the book was the centrality of Israel in the life of a Jew. So paragraph 22 says as follows: after all this back and forth, after 5 very long, in-depth essays and discussions between the king and the Rav, it's time now to pull up stakes. And he says, it's time for me to move to Yerushalayim. Now, in this book, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi himself doesn't talk about himself, because it's not about him. But it is believed that when he's writing these last 2 paragraphs, he is now referring to himself, because Rabbi Yehuda Halevi does eventually make his way to Israel. He dies in Israel almost upon his arrival. But he says to the king, okay, I'm out of here. Time to go to Yerushalayim. And the king of Khazaria, the Kuzari himself, was very upset that this man, he has spent now a very long time. Now, we don't know exactly how long the king and the rabbi spoke, over what length of time, but it was a very protracted length of time. He was upset that he was leaving him. He said to him, what do you need Jerusalem for, the land of Canaan? The divine presence is gone from Jerusalem. Look, you yourself taught me. You can seek out God and get close to God. He's approachable. He's acquirable. There's no such word in English. Any place, as long as you have a pure heart and you have a desire, strong desire. Why do you need to get yourself into danger? Between deserts and oceans. This is, and he says, what are you going to, you're also going to get yourself in trouble, because it's dangerous to travel to Jerusalem or to Israel. This is what made me last week give that shiur, for those of you who listened to it, about Mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, because we talked about that Tosfot, where we have one opinion in Tosfot that said there's no mitzvah today of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael because it's dangerous. So this is exactly the argument that the king is giving to the rabbi. He said, just stay put, stay here. Notice, first of all, he's being very selfish because he's been having a great time with them and talking about all this philosophical stuff. But in addition to that, he's trying to say, look, stay here because it's too dangerous for you to go. So I'm going to put on the screen now the first of the slides from Rav Aviner. I'm going to read this, and as we're going through this particular paragraph, there's certain people who can say things, and there are people who can't. In other words, if I were to get up and make a Facebook post and say what Rav Shlomo Aviner is about to say, I get slaughtered by a lot of people who live in Chutz La'aretz, let's just say, not by people here, but by people in Chutz La'aretz. So we're going to allow him to do the talking tonight. Do you know Kuzari mazkir lanu et ta'anato b'ma'amar sheni seif kaf dalet? This claim of the Kuzari, where he's saying, what do you got to go for? Stay here, reminds us of something we talked about in the second essay in paragraph 24. If you remember a very long time ago, that one of the most well-known paragraphs in the entire book, it's two paragraphs, paragraph 24 and 25, in the second essay, is when the king says the following to him, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't get it, Mr. Rabbi. You keep telling us how all important the land of Israel is to you. What the heck are you guys all doing here in diaspora? Why aren't you in Israel? I don't understand. And he responds by saying, Hovashtani hamelech, you have embarrassed me. You're right. And that all what we are doing with all our prayers in the diaspora is nothing more than ketziftzuf hazarzir, or the twittering of birds. Okay, that's what was back a long time ago we talked about. And now he's going to continue. This is Rav Aviner speaking. Even the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, and the latter prophets who went on Aliyah, the people didn't in general go. We're going to learn this in Ezra and Nehemiah. The majority of people stayed in Bavel. And only a small percentage went on Aliyah. For those of you who were in this shir last week, we talked about this, that there was this concept of that the Shalosh Shavuot, that one of the promises that Am Yisrael was to make, that they would not go in a massive aliyah. That's not why they didn't leave Bavel. It wasn't because it was dangerous to go from Bavel back to Israel. Ela machmat atzlut. It was laziness. Shaitaban that they had. And the difficulty they had to separate themselves from their big, fancy schmancy houses and their very important businesses. It was that was the first test Abraham went through, which we just read last week. So they had their big houses in New York City, and they had them in Teaneck and in Chicago and Los Angeles and Miami, and they had a hard time leaving, so that's why they didn't leave Bavel. He said that the Rabbi Yehuda Levi in the book now was explaining how difficult it was for the king to separate from the Chavers, the Rav, and he tried to convince him, Ben Kovacho. He says, in either case, what are you going to Israel for? The divine presence is not present in Israel. What do you need to go there for? He said, wait a minute. Just because the divine presence is not in Israel, that's a reason to stay in the diaspora. There's also a dispute. There are those who say that after Churban Habayit, that the level of the holiness of the land of Israel may have gone down, God forbid to say. Now, listen to the following there. I'm going to read it slowly. Listen to it carefully. Okay? Muva b'sichot HaRebbi Milubavitch, shekol makom she'ata mekayim mitzvot b'dvekut, Zo Eretz Yisrael. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik B'Kadosh Livracha, had a shita that wherever you do mitzvot and you do them bidveikut, which means you really connect to Hashem by doing the mitzvah, that's considered Israel. In any place a person loves God and serves him with the whole complete heart, hu Beit HaMikdash. That's the Beit HaMikdash. L'shita zo, according to that opinion, l'chinam kol mesirut hanefesh shel Rambam, Rabbeinu Yehuda Halevi, v'chol gedolei Yisrael b'sikun nafsham la'alot l'Eretz Yisrael would seem like what a waste. It was not worth it for Ramban and the Rambam and the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and all these other gedolim who tried to make Aliyah and did succeed, in spite of the fact that it was very dangerous. Like they could have just stayed according to that. V'im kain gam Ezra v'Nechemia b'pnei ma'alu. If that's the case, if the Lubavitcher Rebbe was right, what did they make Aliyah? Why did Ezra and Nechemia even try to go back? The gam hameraglim ayu pturim u'b'shal manna and shu. The meraglim also should have been patur, meaning from having to go to Israel. It was dangerous. So what did they get punished for? Ela kulam nimukim lahatzdik ha'atzlut shahayta bahem. Okay, listen to this line very carefully. This is Rav Shlomo Aviner speaking. That all these nimukim, all these twists and turns trying to justify the laziness, is just trying to justify the laziness that they had in not making Aliyah. Rabbi Yosef Zatzal said that even though Israel is a very holy place, bizman hagalut, in the time of the Galut, nitan lagia lihitromemut kedushatit gevoah mimena begalut. That you also, when you're in Galut, you can achieve a level of very high spiritual holiness. How horrible it is to say something like this. Shimkach, if that's the case. He's basically saying that by being mevatel the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, remember this is going in the assumption, a mitzvah Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah chiyuvit, it's the one you have to do. So you're accomplishing a mitzvah of mitzvot and dveikut b'Hashem, but being mevatel the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Lemashal, for example, akayem bikur cholim toch nesiyah b'Shabbat. I'm going to go drive on Shabbat to the hospital to visit somebody who's sick, and then I'll do a mitzvah. Okay, this is what the king is now saying to the rabbi. There's no reason to go to Israel. What you're going to accomplish there, you can be a good Jew in Chutz La'aretz. You can achieve Kedusha in Chutz La'aretz. You can have Dveikut B'Hashem in Chutz La'aretz. Tiyun Sheni, a second claim. Hadrachim b'chezkat sakana. It's dangerous. And don't forget that on the way there to Israel, they hate our guts, and you're going to get hurt. Okay, that's the introduction here. We ain't seen nothing yet. Let's go back to the text. We're in paragraph 23 if you have a book. Amar HaChaver, the Chaver said, the rabbi said back to the king, HaShekhinah hanir'et ayin ba'ayin hi asher ne'edara. What is missing? When you say that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, has left Israel, what is it that actually has left? Only the type of Shekhinah that is seen eye to eye, meaning nivuah. Ki enena niglet ki im lenavi, o lehamon nirtza b'makom ha'miuchad. V'hi asher anachnu mitzapim la. Now, the kind of Shekhinah, the Gilui Shekhinah, the revelation of the Shekhinah, the divine presence in Israel, what we don't have is Nevuah, but it is what we hope to have. Be'omor, when we say, Ki ayin ba'ayin yiru b'shuv Hashem Tzion, that eye to eye we shall see, they shall see, when Hashem returns to Tzion. And when we say that we hope to be able to see with our own eyes the return of Hashem to Tzion, that doesn't just mean that we want the Beit HaMikdash. It means we want everything that goes with it, which is a level, again, of prophecy, the level of connection to Hashem. But, so he's right, that they don't have right now. But, says the Rav, Hashchina hanisteret haruchanit, the hidden spiritual Shechina, he im kol Yisrael ezrachi v'im kol Baal Da'at dat ha'amitit, is rests within every single Jew who truly practices Torah and Jewish life. Zacha ma'asim tahor alev, as long as he is pure of heart. Nafsho v'ra le'elokei Yisrael. The Eretz Canaan, and still the land of Eretz Canaan, miuchedet le'Elohei Yisrael, is still special, unique to God. V'amasim lo yishlemu ki'im ba. And you can't, I'm going to use a little different twist on the translation, that you cannot be a complete Jew except by living in Israel. And many, many mitzvot, one is being mevatel. Notice, he doesn't say you can't accomplish certain mitzvot outside of Israel. He said that you are being mevatel. You are actually, I don't know how you even say it in English, you are nullifying mitzvot by not being in Israel to keep the mitzvot. And where do we get a true heart? Where do we actually have our neshama is affected that makes it more holy and more pure? In Hashem's house, here in Israel. This is true, even if I was saying this as a mashal, as a parable. How much more so it's true and accurate by the fact that we know that this is truth. In other words, I'm not saying, he's not saying, I'm giving this Jew as a mashal that the land of Israel. He says, Tachlis, this is what it is. You want to be a complete Jew? Can only be in Israel. You want to have a better neshama. You want to have a clearer heart. You want to be closer to Hashem? Land of Israel. And by being in Israel, you awaken this desire to purify yourself, your neshama. Even how much more so someone who comes and travels from a distance, i.e. makes aliyah. Listen to what he just said. A person who's born here has a tremendous zechut because from the day they're born, they were born in Israel. And they have the opportunity, to purify themselves by the fact that they're in Israel. They have the ability to come close to Hashem because they're in Israel. But he says, Kal v'chomer, more so, someone comes from a distance and makes aliyah. V'chol sheken, now this one's going to blow you away. V'chol sheken lemisha kadmu lo avonot. And even more so, someone who comes here who has done many averos in their life, many sins. V'umevakesh kaparat elokim, and he wants expiation. He wants to be forgiven by God. V'iyefshar lo v'korbanot, and we can't bring any sacrifices. Asher hayu kvuim l'chol avon v'avon mizadon u'shkagad, that were established for every sin, whether they're on purpose or by accident. V'smocha ma shamru rabotenu. Instead, we rely on what our rabbis taught us. Galut mechaperet avon. He says, what is this galut he's talking about? Going from Chutz La'aretz and coming to Israel. It's not galut in the terminology of being in the diaspora, but it means you're being golel lemakom acher. You're going to a different place. And that alone is mechaper on the avon. So when a person gets married, they say the day of the wedding is like a day of kaparat avonot. But now he's also telling us here that the day you made aliyah, the day that someone will make aliyah Bezrat Hashem, according to Rabbi Yehuda Levi, appears that it's also a day of kaparat avonot. Now, let's take a look at what Rav Aviner does now with these paragraphs, with this paragraph. Even though this whole book really is dealing with this topic. He's trying to reply. Notice, those of you who are not learning the Kuzari in the past with me, a lot of the book is dealing with how the importance of Israel and the centrality of Israel and the closest you can get to Hashem. And we talked about, but we had one special shiur a long time ago on the topic of Avira Da'ara Machkim, that the just being in Israel makes you wiser. It's true. We don't see the Shekhinah clearly, face to face, so to speak, on a daily basis. It only happens when we are a holy people, acting holy in the pure land of Israel through a Navi. That there's a Beit HaMikdash here, and it's properly built, and we have the rule over it. Therefore, today, the Shekhinah is hiding. On the one hand, it would seem we can't tell too much difference between Israel and other lands. And we're hoping for the day where all this will return. That's what we're hoping for. In our days, I don't know why he says le'arza, that's wrong. We see the return of, slowly, the beginning of the return of the Shekhinah to our land. That's only as long as we contemplate that we really want ayin ba'ayin. Again, that's the term for the Shekhinah being here, begalui, revealed. His Bir Rabbeinu Tzvi Yehuda Zatzal, Tzvi Yehuda Kook Zatzal explained, Shakavana hina lechaven et ha'ayin ha'enoshit shalanu, that we should try to aim our eye, so to speak, in our vision, our human eye, el mula ayin elokit, to be opposite the eye of God, kebitui panim bepanim, va'az nireh, and then we will see, kakatuv v'ne'en Hashem el yireyav, v'achem biyamav shel melech Kuzar, lo nireh davar mikol zeh. In the days of the Kuzar, this is in the 13th century approximately. Oh no, before that, 11th century approximately. This didn't happen. And even though the Shekhinah seemed to be so far removed at that time period of history from Israel, there still was a more important adifiyut, adif, hello? Preference to live in the land of Israel. We know that it says that the Shekhinah, yes, went into Galut with Am Yisrael, but the Shekhinah is never leaving Israel. What's he talking about? That the Shekhinah, the hidden Shekhinah, is still here. Even though the hidden Shekhinah can rest upon a person anywhere, even in Chutz La'aretz, and we said that anywhere that the Shekhinah, that the Bnei Yisrael in Galut, Shekhinah goes with. Nevertheless, Eretz Yisrael hi leolam b'madrega. I cut the word off here just a second. I have my book. The madrega yetera. It's on a higher level in Israel. Asher Hashem Elokech einei Hashem Elokecha ba mereshit hashana ba'ad achrit shana. It's the land where Hashem is always, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, his eye is upon it. In other words, we have that special watchfulness over it. Imagine you have a diamond in a little box, diamond ring in a little box, and you have a choice to leave it somewhere in a public area where no one's going to steal it, but you just leave it there. Or you're going to leave it with someone who's going to literally sit with it day and night until you come to pick it up. Which would you choose? So he's saying, yes, Hashem is everywhere, but the Shekhinah has more connection to the land, and Hashem is looking over it and watching over it every moment of every day of the entire year. He said, this is where you want to be. HaMitzvot mufiot bishlemutan Eretz Yisrael. True, you can only do complete mitzvot here in the land of Israel. Amar Chafetz Chaim shekiyum mitzvah achat be'eretz Yisrael. It's an amazing statement. He says it in what he would call the Nesivos Yisrael, that the keeping one mitzvah in the land of Israel, shakul keneged 20 pa'am b'chutz la'aretz, is counts on how he comes up with his shikul, is the equivalent of it being done 20 times in chutz la'aretz. It's going to go even further. Chen katav sifri v'samtem et dvarai ele al af al pi shani megale etchem. Even though, he says, even though Hashem, I sent you into galut, heyu metzuyanim b'mitzvot. Be outstanding with mitzvot. Shekishatem chozrim lo yeh lachem chadashim. They won't be new to you. Hatzivi lach tziyunim. Make for yourselves markers, What does that mean? Okay, here's another time I'm going to knock your socks off. HaTorah u'mitzvoteha shayachim le'eretz Yisrael. The Torah and the mitzvot in the Torah are connected to, related to Israel. ובחוץ לארץ יש להן רק ערך של ציורים. And in chutz la'aretz, the value of a mitzvah is just a reminder. Erech shel shimur, some form of a kind of put it on hold, the too low, and nothing more than that. By the way, Rav Abiner is not the first person to say this. The Kli Yakar said as well that the mitzvot in chutz la'aretz are practiced, so we shouldn't forget when we get to Israel, so we can really do them. All this is from a place of emunah, or faith, or complete faith, that we need to, that we have to be and settle and return to the land of Israel. HaMitzvot begalut, the mitzvot that you do in the chutz la'aretz, have no value in and of themselves, but because they will have value when you do them in Israel, they also take on value in chutz la'aretz. No, it's not that chas v'shalom to say that you do a mitzvah, you get no credit for it whatsoever if you do it in chutz la'aretz. But the credit is different. It's because you're doing it as a hachana, according to him, called Kli Yakar, and if I'm not mistaken, the Or HaChaim says it to a certain extent as well, and I'm sure others, that because it's more preparatory, you still get something out of that. I'm going to give you what I think is maybe a comparable situation, but it's not. It's not exact. Let's say a person is in school and they're studying for a test in Tanakh, and they study 7 hours, and then they fail the test. They still get 7 hours worth of Torah learned, right? They didn't pass the test. They were preparing for the test. They didn't pass it. They failed, but they still did learn. So if a person is doing mitzvot in chutz la'aretz, they are preparing. Now, they're not in Israel, so they didn't pass that test, in quotes, but they still did do the mitzvah, so they get some credit for that. וזכות הלב וזכות הלב וטהרת המעשים ומעשית הנפש להשם מארץ ישראל ובחוץ לארץ. You cannot compare the value of a mitzvah and the purification to your heart, and I'll add to your neshama, as he says here, מעשית הנפש להשם, when you do something in Israel compared to chutz la'aretz. לא שאין ערך למצווה בחוץ לארץ, like I just said, not that there's no value to a mitzvah in chutz la'aretz, אך היא דומה לשתיל שנשתל בעציץ. But that kind of mitzvah is similar to a, how do you say a shatil, a baby tree? What do you call it?
Sapling.
Sapling, thank you. It's placed into an atzitz, into a flower pot, a pot. And then you take it and you transfer it to its pot where it belongs and its natural growth place. Avir Eretz Yisrael machkim, as I mentioned already, that is the land of Israel makes one wiser. Chayin neshamot avir artzecha. Omnam yotzim edei chovat hamitzvah gam b'chutz la'aretz. Of course, you're still yotzei the mitzvah when you do it in chutz la'aretz. Aval kiyumah bishlemut v'romemut, but doing it in its entirety and its elevated status, yirakan be'eretz Yisrael, is only here in Israel. You can, to an extent, purify your heart in chutz la'aretz, be'ezomidat to some extent. But true purification of one's heart, efsharit kan bilvad, is only possible here. And also, true kavanat halev and purification only can take place here in the land of Israel. Let me see something. If I have this one here. Yes. Move y'all into the corner here. Sorry. Okay. I have to be able to see what I'm saying. There. Sorry. If he had not put it in bold, I still would have said it like that. All this begins from a specific point. And that jumping off point is the faith and the knowledge that there's something special about the land of Israel, something divine about the land of Israel. Kavanat halev b'chutz laaretz meurevet b'sigim. We already saw this before, this topic. He quotes here of Chaim Volozhin in the name of Vilna Gaon, but the Rav Aviner has mentioned this before, that when person, we say we have to try to have kavana, to really internalize and think about the mitzvah that you're doing at that moment. Yes, you can have it in chutz laaretz, but it's mixed with sigim. Sigim are impurities. Va'afilu she'ifat adam le'eretz Yisrael. And even a person who has a desire for the land of Israel, living in chutz laaretz, but saying, "Oi, what am I doing here? I need to be in Israel. I want to be in Israel." You're already at the point where you're able to purify yourself and your heart even more. Just that, not just, oh, Israel's the right place to be, but no, I want to be there. I need to be there. It also says in Gemara Ketubot, "L'tzion yeyamer ish yulad b'Hashem, echad hanolad ba ve'echad hamitzapeh lir'otah." What does that mean? Gam hamitzapeh b'chol me'odo l'eretz Yisrael. Even someone in chutz laaretz who truly, truly, truly desires to be in the land of Israel and maybe cannot get there for various reasons, who mitmaleh b'kedusha, is filled with kedusha. I'm going to take a little point here. I want to add something. When we made the announcement that we're making Aliyah, let me take off a screenshot. When we made the announcement that we're making Aliyah, I found a lot of very interesting things happened. First of all, 95% of the reaction of the people was extremely positive. But I also found something very interesting. Almost all the people, and there were dozens and dozens of people, came up to me right there on that Shabbat, and then the next few weeks, and any dinners I would go to, people came over to, Mazal Tov, was so wonderful. And I would say 80 to 90% of the time, after the Mazal Tov and everything, we're so happy for you, almost every single time they said, I wish I could go, but I really can't because, and they felt they had to justify it, which, by the way, is good, because they at least felt some level of oops. But I'll be honest with you. You take the average Jew, and I'm not just talking in the United States, Canada, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Brazil. The average Jew that lives in chutz laaretz, whose life is good, they will probably tell you, of course, Israel's where we belong. But for them, it's not on their radar. And we talked about last week, when Mashiach comes, okay, when Mashiach comes, that's when we're going to make Aliyah. It's not on the radar. Now, what Rav Aviner is telling us here is, by just putting on your radar and saying, I know that's where I belong. That's not putting it on your radar. It's where I belong, and I want to be there. I'm going to do what I can. I may not make it there next year. I may not make it there in 5 years. Okay, but I need to figure it out. I need to talk to someone, maybe in 10 years when I retire, maybe in 5 years. And during those 5 years, I'll learn Hebrew and have a plan. Think about it. He says that alone, you just raised the bar tremendously for your level in chutz laaretz to be able to purify your neshama more, purify your heart more. But ultimately, it's only by being in Israel that you can reach the real next level. Let's continue a few more lines of what he has to say here. Over here. Hu chai mikdushata, hu kol ha'et daruch umuchan. He lives with this enhanced level of kedusha while he's in chutz laaretz. At all time, he's prepared. Uverega shetizdamen hasha'ah, when it's the right time, miyad yakum v'ya'aleh. He'll get up and he'll go make aliyah. Im lo kain, if that's not the case, he now quotes what I mentioned before, essay number 2, paragraph 25, where the rabbi said to the king that all of our tefillot in chutz laaretz, where we say and that we want to live in Israel, and Israel is the land where we want to be, etc., 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 is nothing more than the twittering of birds. I'm talking about the person who truly anticipates and wants to live in the land of Israel. Already with his intention, with his hope and his desire and his expectation to make aliyah, already is breathing the land of Israel. Agav, by the way, zoi gam derech hasbara nechona legabe aliyah laaretz. Lo tiur tovot Okay, actually, I don't want to continue do this part. Okay, I just want to read. No, I'm not going to. I'm going to cut it short tonight, because I also have someplace to be, but that's not the reason I'm cutting it short, because the next part is going to be too long for me to work with. I want to kind of clarify a couple things. And I'm very, very, very well aware of the fact that I have many friends and many family, much family in Chutz La'aretz. We all do, I'm sure. To lahashmitz, to say that everyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz, they're being over in Isur, and how dare they live in Chutz La'aretz and not doing any mitzvot, we can't say something like that. We can say that the level of keeping mitzvot is very different. That according to some, and it's not us saying it, not in this time, we're talking people in the 1700s, the 1400s that said, and before, that it's practice, it's you get points for it, but not necessarily the full points you could get, so to speak, and however terminology you want to use, by keeping the mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz. But there's a radical difference, and I'm not sure, but I think this is really a chiddush of Rav Aviner, but I might be wrong, that a person who has a plan, not just I know I belong there, but a person who has a plan, and not just a plan, but even just a strong desire, I really need to make Aliyah. I got to figure out a way. That already puts that individual on a much higher level, at a point where they're going to get a greater ability to raise their level of Kedusha. And I would think that if that is true and accurate, and he says you're already ki'ilu noshem avira de'eretz Yisrael, you're already breathing the land of Israel. It'll be interesting to note, to have a discussion with somebody who went from, that's where I belong, to really thinking and making that change. If they had any change in their personality, in the way they understand things in life. We discussed months ago when we discussed the topic of avira de'eretz Yisrael machkim, that the land of Israel makes one wiser, that all of us at one point or another felt that once we made Aliyah, or even we were here visiting, we thought differently. Our thoughts worked differently. We quoted Rav Kook and some other people as well. So I'm wondering if someone who has come to that conclusion that they want to make Aliyah, and they really feel like they want to make Aliyah, just they're waiting for the right time, but truly wants to, if they also have that metamorphosis along the way. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to continue this next week. By the way, for those of you who are not part of this regular class, I only have, I think, maybe 2 more classes on Kuzari. It's going to be on the same theme. You're welcome to continue and to join until we finish that. And then we're going to be probably in about a little over a month, move into Tanya, Bezrat Hashem. So on that happy note, Bezrat Hashem, wish you a wonderful evening or day, depending where you are. And we shall talk. Let's be very proud of ourselves, those of us who are here. Be proud of us, those of us who are not here but want to be here. And those who are not yet even having it on the radar, let's be proud that they hopefully will get on the Aliyah bandwagon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.
יישר כוח.
This-
לילה טוב.
Living the dream, Rabbi.
Yes, no joke. Truly living the dream.
All are living the dream, exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful.